This is Newsroom. Hello and welcome from Johannesburg in South Africa. I'm Eben Jansen. The show is live. It's broadcast from our studios in Auckland Park. We're also streaming live on YouTube right now, where the whole show is always available on demand on our YouTube channel. On our show today, we'll be live at the Marikana Commission of Inquiry shortly, where Deputy President Cyril Ramaphosa is expected to conclude his testimony today. Vuyo from Mvoko is standing by with a quick update for us, but first, we're going to go and get the news headlines.
Well, hello and morning and welcome to Newsroom. I'm Catherine Malan and let's take a look at the news making headlines this morning. Deputy President Cyril Ramaphosa is expected to conclude his testimony today at the Farlam Commission of Inquiry. The commission is investigating the violence that claimed 44 lives during a miners' strike at Marikana 2 years ago. Yesterday, Ramaphosa was grilled about an email conversation between himself and Lonmin management. Protesters disrupted the proceedings, calling for Ramaphosa's resignation.
When I said that they should be brought to book, I had anticipated and expected that those who were responsible would be identified and they would be arrested, which is what I expect police to do normally in pursuing their tasks and duties.
Senior ANC MP and former Cabinet Minister Paulo Jordan has resigned as a Member of Parliament. The ruling party said it received a detailed explanation from Jordan on claims that his qualifications are false. The Sunday Times broke the story, saying not a single university noted on Jordan's CV could confirm that he had obtained degrees with them and that he could not claim to have a doctorate. He is regarded as one of the great ANC intellectuals.
Just the advent of democratic governance, which ensures that all South Africans have a voice in the government of their country, is something to celebrate. But over and above that, there are the achievements of the democratic government.
Moving to Africa, Liberia has announced that it would soon receive doses of an experimental Ebola drug and give it to 2 sick doctors, making them the first Africans to receive some of the treatment. The news comes as anger is growing over the fact that the only people to receive the experimental treatment so far have been Westerners, 2 Americans and a Spaniard, all of whom were evacuated to their home countries from Liberia. The death toll since the outbreak in March stands on nearly 1,000. And sport, Zimbabwe will return to the crease on 28 for the loss of 1 wicket in their second innings of the one-off test match against South Africa. According to Proteas batsman Faf du Plessis, his team is in perfect position after day 3 when they were bowled out for 397 with a 141-run first innings lead. And then tributes are pouring in worldwide this morning for actor-comedian Robin Williams, who passed away at his home in the U.S. state California at the age of 63. U.S. President Barack Obama led tributes this morning for Williams, calling him one of a kind. His comments came after Susan Schneider, the actor's wife, who called her husband one of the world's most beloved artists and beautiful human beings. Williams won an Academy Award for his role as a therapist in 1997's Good Will Hunting. He had been suffering from severe depression.
I ask you about war, you'd probably throw Shakespeare at me, right? Once more into the breach, dear friends. But you've never been near one. You've never held your best friend's head in your lap and watch him gasp his last breath looking to you for help.
Truly a tragic loss. That full clip is available on our Newsroom Facebook page. You can also go follow us on Twitter at SABC Newsroom. Eben, back to you.
Thanks, Katrine. They say those that make us the happiest are often the saddest ones themselves. A very sad day indeed with the passing of the late, great Robin Williams. Well, this morning's business, Deputy President Cyril Ramaphosa is expected to conclude his testimony today at the Farlam Commission of Inquiry. The second day of his appearance at the Commission coincides with the second anniversary of the killing of 2 Lonmin Platinum security guards who were hacked to death in the days leading up to the August 16, 2012 shootings at Marikana. The guards were murdered as they tried to stop marchers from proceeding to the National Union of Mine Workers offices. Now, for the latest, let's cross to the SABC's contributing editor, Vuyo Mvoko, who's at the Farlam Commission of Inquiry in Centurion, Pretoria today. Good morning, Vuyo. Thanks for joining us.
Morning, Eben.
It's been an interesting first day for the Deputy President taking to the stand. We've seen a whole host of scenarios play out with protests and the like. Just give us your expectation at the Commission on the second and what will be the final day, one would think, for the Deputy President there.
Well, yesterday was an interesting day indeed, beginning, as you saw there, with the Deputy President's own legal team trying to put across that message of what it is exactly that he was trying to do when he sent those emails, when he had those conversations with the Ministers of Police and of Mineral Resources. I think things looked very good up until, of course, the point when evidence leader Jeff Butlander then started with a different way of looking at things, where before the Deputy President had said he had relied on the police and the reason he called them was because he wanted them to do the right thing, and that is to arrest criminals so that they can be put in jail. But when Jeff Butlander started asking questions about, in fact, that go perhaps to the integrity of the police, the conduct of the police themselves. And I think that's where things started getting a bit wobbly, if you like, because he started talking about, for instance, he brought forward a conversation between Brigadier Mbombo, who was the Commissioner of Commissioner of Police in the Northwest, her conversation with Lonmin executives, which in fact could be deemed inappropriate, but also another conversation where she talks about a Freedom Front, Economic Freedom Fighters leader, Julius Malema. There again, there are some what other people, a lot of people in fact, would consider to be inappropriate comments. And then from then on, you also then, that line of questioning perhaps continued, which I would imagine would have rattled the Deputy President as well. He doesn't show it. He kept his smile, he kept his cool, but I think if you listened carefully to the line of questioning, they would, I think, have done some damage to the kind of narrative that he would have loved to see. If you listened to Tembeka Ngugaitobi from the Legal Resources Center, he was talking about his role, his fiduciary duties, if you like, perhaps suggesting that if Cyril Ramaphosa could accept what the Lonmin executives had to tell them about whether they could afford housing for the workers of Lonmin in Marikana, for example, you began to see suggestions that perhaps even as a director, a non-executive director of Lonmin, he didn't perhaps do his work as much as or as well as some people thought he would have done. Continue to go and listen to Advocate Dumisa Ntsebeza, who again brought back the memories of a Cyril Ramaphosa who was very instrumental in the negotiations that brought us where we are today as a country. There again, Advocate Ntsebeza suggesting that perhaps the country expected a lot more, given the expertise, his history, and his reputation, than the Ramaphosa who was a director at Lonmin and who didn't do as much as was expected of him when it came to negotiating an amicable solution to what was clearly a very volatile situation. So you can expect Dali Mpofu today to continue in that vein and perhaps do even a lot more if his performance when he, for example, interrogated the National Police Commissioner Ria Piyaga is anything to go by. Yeben?
Well, yeah, thank you very much. We have to go inside. Proceedings have just gotten underway. Deputy President Cyril Ramaphosa is taking the stand there for his second day on the stand at the Farlam Commission of Inquiry. It's happening in Centurion, just outside of Pretoria. Let's go straight to the Farlam Commission now.
At the very least, you would have made inquiries about what management was doing in order to deal with the storm when it came, correct?
I would say that we would most probably have said a different approach needed to be taken to address the problem and to more or less get in line with what others had done.
Certainly, so some steps would have to be taken, contingency plans put in place, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Now, Mr. Ramaphosa, you've testified that you knew prior to the commencement of the strike at Lonmin in 2012 that there had been talks between Lonmin and the RDOs, correct?
I got to know about it when I read Mr. Da Costa's evidence, but it only came to the board just before, I think.
Just before the strike?
Yeah. There is a minute to that effect in the papers.
And you knew, I take it, that those talks had been conducted directly between Lonmin, managers, and the RDOs, and not through NUM, correct?
That detail I did not know, I must admit.
You knew, presumably, that those talks had culminated in Lonmin offering the RDOs an allowance. I think it was referred to in the email that you received as a special bonus, but essentially an allowance of 750 rand.
That only came to surface to me when the Chief Executive Officer reported to the board.
But prior to the strike?
I think it would have been just prior, yes. Yes, I think that's what the record says.
In any event, that information is repeated in the email that you received on the 11th of August, that an offer was made to RDOs which they rejected. So that was your understanding of what had happened, correct?
Yes.
And then we know that the RDOs embarked on an unprotected strike over the same issue on the 10th of August 2012, correct?
Yes.
Now, let's go to the email that you received.
Moved away from wage increases and so forth, and negotiations.
Yes, I'm coming back there to some extent.
Coming back.
No,
there were some questions I want to ask, but they may well be the ones you're going to come back to, so I won't ask my questions now.
So, Mr. Ramaphosa, if we could look at quadruple J1, that's the email that you received on the 11th of August, informing you that you say is the first notice you got of the unprotected strike, correct?
Yes.
And the email that you got sets out Lonmin's response to the strike. At the bottom of the page, it reads, "The response of Lonmin is to follow disciplinary procedures and, if required, will dismiss the illegal strikers. Barnard is preparing the ultimatum, which they will issue tomorrow, and will terminate contracts of employment should the employees not show up for duty tomorrow." So you understood from that, presumably, that Lonmin was not going to engage with the strikers, correct? Mm-hmm. If you could just verbalize your answer, please.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
And you testified yesterday that you did not agree with that approach. As far as you were concerned, negotiations were the correct way to go and were, in fact, the only workable solution, correct?
Yes.
Now, if we go over the page...
Leave that email, can I? There's something I'd like to put to the witness. The first sentence of Ms. Ntubi's email to you says this. Yesterday, well, the first two sentences. Yesterday, the Lonmin rock operators, RDO, at Korea Mine embarked on an illegal strike demanding more money. This has been on the table with management since the Impala strike earlier this year. Yes. Were you aware of the fact that this had been on the table with management since the Impala strike earlier in the year, which we've heard was about April?
No, I was not aware.
Do you think that you should have been informed of it at the time?
I would have said yes.
If we, still on that email, if we could just go over the page to the next paragraph of the email. It reads as follows. This is necessary, and that's a reference back to the response that Lonmin has adopted to the strike. This is necessary as Lonmin has been engaging, or rather had been engaging with the RDOs in trying to address their needs. Secondly, the strike is illegal. And lastly, other workers in the business are watching the situation, and if the RDOs are successful to bargain outside the engagement structures, it will set a very bad precedent. So there, Mr. Ramaphosa, what's essentially being communicated to you are the reasons for the stance that Lonman has adopted in response to the strike, correct?
Yes.
Now, let's look at those reasons. Firstly, you are told that other workers in the business are watching the situation, and if the RDOs are successful to bargain outside the engagement structures, it will set a bad precedent. But now, that has really already happened. Isn't that correct? Lonman has already, the facts are that Lonman has already engaged with RDOs outside the structures and made them an offer, correct?
Indeed.
So that can't be a reason for refusing to speak to the strikers, correct?
That is correct.
The second reason that is given is that the strike is illegal. That's the word that is used. You see that?
Yes.
And of course, that's not correct, is it? Workers don't commit a crime by going on strike, even if it's unprotected.
Chair, that question is rather ambiguous. Does Mlenotran mean to refer to illegality in the sense of criminality, or simply not protected under the scheme of the labour laws?
What we've done in this commission is we've, over and over again, emphasised that an unprotected strike is unprotected in the sense that a dismissal following upon it is not an unfair labour practice. So there are consequences which flow from participating in an unprotected strike which don't flow from participating in a protected strike. And we've also, the point's been emphasised over and over again, that strikers do not commit a crime by participating in an unprotected strike. They rather foolishly, some might say, put their head in the noose that they can be dismissed without having redress. But that's the distinction we draw, and I think that's the point that Mr. Barnes is making. But I take your point. The terminology is a bit imprecise, but I think the main thrust of what Ms. Barnes is putting is clear. If the witness has a problem, I'm sure he'll let us know. But he is one who has himself been involved in many unprotected strikes in the 80s, and he knows very well, I'm sure, the distinction better than you or I do.
Yes, of course, Mr. Ramaphosa, it used to be a crime to participate in a strike that was not in accordance with the legal prescripts. That's no longer the case, correct?
Yes.
So it's accurate and appropriate to refer to an unprotected strike rather than an illegal strike.
Indeed.
Correct. Now, of course, the fact that the strike was unprotected was not, again, in and of itself, a reason not to speak to the strikers, correct?
I would agree.
And of course, if a company has a policy that requires it to speak to strikers in the event of an unprotected strike, then they would be obliged to follow that policy, correct?
Yes.
Were you aware that Lonman had such a policy?
Not the precise parts of it. What we always sought to encourage is that, and this is a situation where they were dealing with one union that they had recognized, and I guess they never really had to deal with many of such strikes in the new dispensation. So they had one port of call, which was the NUM, and in this situation, I think they were traversing uncharted ground.
Well, let me take you to the policy so that you can see precisely what it says. It's Exhibit XXX8. If we could have that on the screen, please.
Quite a lengthy document, I think.
Yes, it's...
give the page number. I think there's a particular section, chapter.
Paginated page 24. And it's clause 8.3. You'll see that 8.3 deals with the steps that are required to be taken in the event of unprotected industrial actions. There's reference to ultimatums that need to be given. There's reference to application for a court interdict that may be made. And then 8.3.6 describes the formation of a management committee. 8.3.7 describes the formation of a committee from these strikers that will be established in order to speak to management. 8.3.8 goes on to say that should preferably not exceed 4 people. And then 8.3.9 deals with the fact that an appropriate location must be identified at which talks shall be held. So the witnesses from Lonmin that have testified thus far have confirmed that that's what's envisaged by this policy, is that a committee of management and a committee of the strikers should be set up and engage in talks, and that was not done in this case. You agree that it ought to have been done?
Well, in terms of this policy, yes, it ought to have been done.
So, Mr. Ramaphosa, if we look at the reasons that were communicated to you for Lonmin's stance in relation to the strike on the 11th of August, surely, sir, you could not have been satisfied with the reasons that were communicated to you for Lonmin's stance. Isn't that correct?
The reasons being?
The reasons being, one, that it would set a bad precedent to engage outside the structures when that had already happened, to your knowledge, and two, that this was an illegal strike. Surely you would have not considered those to be valid reasons for not engaging with the strikers.
That is correct.
And yet you didn't take this up with management. You didn't say to management, but these reasons don't stand up to scrutiny. That this is not a basis not to engage with the strikers. You didn't do that. Isn't that correct?
Are you saying so as a matter of fact?
Well, there's certainly no evidence that you did.
I think she's asking you whether that's correct. There should be a question mark hanging over her head after she made that statement.
I did not notice the question mark. There were discussions that ensued, particularly in relation to the suggestion that there could even be dismissals, which, as I said yesterday, I'm opposed to. So those discussions about embarking on an option of dismissals and so forth did happen, and I remember communicating to Ms. Ngube that is not an option that should be pursued, and there should be discussions.
Did you communicate to Lonmin, though, to anyone from Lonmin, that there should be negotiations with the strikers?
I remember, and maybe the full detail is not immediately available to me. I do remember talking to Ms. Ngube, who is the Shanduka representative, and I also remember talking to Mr. Barnard, who I would have said to dismissal is not an option as they have already conceived.
Did you say that negotiations are the only option?
Yes, that is my general stance, that negotiations are the only option in matters like these.
And you said so to Mr. Mokoena?
I said so clearly to Ms. Ngube.
And Mr. Mokoena?
I don't recall how the conversation would have gone, but in the course of our discussions that may well have emerged.
So you have no specific recollection of giving that particular message to any Lonmin employee?
I do not, I'm afraid.
Now, Mr. Ramaphosa, you've said that you were extremely concerned about the violence at Marikana, correct? Yes, for the moment. Please go ahead, Chair.
One point that was made to the police when they came on the scene on the 13th, in fact to the National Commissioner, I think it was that there was a 2-year wage agreement in place.
Yes.
And there was therefore no basis for negotiating any change until the 2 years were up, which were going to be October 2013.
Yeah.
And that was a point, that was a position which, as far as we could make out from the evidence, was supported by the local branch of NUM. But when Mr. Sekwana came, he said that was incorrect. The relevant clause in the 2-year wage agreement said that no strike action was possible to enforce a wage demand during the 2-year period. But he said that didn't prevent negotiation, and he said in appropriate cases, if there'd been a dramatic change in circumstances, negotiation could be, and had in the past been resorted to.
Yes.
And he referred to a precedent from, I think it was around about 2005, as far as I remember, where there'd been a 2-year agreement, I think it was a 2-year agreement, provision for an increase at the end of the first year of a certain percentage. But there'd been a dramatic rise in the rate of inflation, which made that increase meaningless. Yeah. And therefore, the NUM adopted the stance that negotiation was possible, despite the fact that the 2-year agreement had not yet run its course, and they did so, and they succeeded in getting a change. Yes. And he conceded also, as I understood his evidence, that the increase that the RDOs got at Impala, and then later at Amplatz as well, was that kind of change of circumstance which would have justified negotiation. Yes. So I take it that's a view you agree with as well.
I would agree with that view, Mr. Chairman.
Was the question of the 2-year agreements and the Lonman stance as communicated to the police that negotiations were inappropriate because the 2-year agreement hadn't run its course and that would only be a matter for consideration in October 2013, was that a matter that was raised with you at any stage by the Lonman management?
Not in as direct a way as that. There was a view that once you have that type of 2-year agreement, you need to run through with it until the end and then renegotiate. But I would tend to agree with what Mr. Zokwana was saying and what you are saying as well, that given new circumstances that would have come on the scene, there would be a need to renegotiate to avert a bad situation.
Thank you.
So, Mr. Ramaphosa, you've testified that you were extremely concerned about the violence at Marikana during that period, correct?
Yes.
And the violence that was taking place arose out of the strike, correct?
Yes.
So there was a strong probability that if the strike was resolved, the violence would end, correct?
Yes.
And the cause of the strike was a wage dispute, correct?
Yes.
So there needed to be some mechanism in place in order to deal with the wage dispute, in order to resolve the strike, in order for the violence to end, correct?
I would agree.
And there needed to be some mechanism put in place as a matter of urgency to attend to the wage dispute, correct?
Yes.
Now, surely, Mr. Ramaphosa, you would have been concerned to ensure that that was happening. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
The mechanism that could have been put in place fairly easily would have been the mechanism referred to in paragraph 8.3 of this document. Would you agree with that?
I would agree with that.
See, the peculiar thing, excuse me, Mr. Ramaphosa, is that there was nothing in place at all. Nothing was being done at all in relation to the wage dispute. Lonman refused to speak to the strikers at all, despite being repeatedly requested to do so, not only by the strikers but by the police. You say you didn't know that. Is that correct?
Could you rephrase that question about what I did not know?
Yes, I apologize. It was a long, convoluted question.
Yes, please.
The Lonman refused to engage with the strikers at all, despite being requested to do so by the strikers themselves, the police, Mr. Matunjwa, and Bishop Siorka, to name four parties from whom that request was coming.
Yes.
Sorry, Mr. Chairperson. In relation to Mr. Matunjwa requesting Lonman to engage directly with the strikers, there's no evidence to that effect.
I think that's right. Let's take Mr. Matunjwa out of the question. You don't need him in the question. Carry on with the abridged question.
Let's just stick to the strikers and the police. The police were asking Lonman to engage with the strikers, as were the strikers themselves. Lonman refused to do so. Your evidence is that you did not know that,
yes,
correct?
Yes, I did not.
There wasn't even a meeting organized between Lonman and all the unions together. And I must point out to you, Mr. Ramaphosa, that Mr. Matunjwa's Mr. Matunjwa's reaction on being informed of the strike on Friday, the 10th of August 2012, his response was to immediately suggest that a meeting be called between Lonmin management and all the unions as soon as possible. Were you ever informed of that?
No, I was not informed of that.
And that didn't happen. The first time that Lonmin and AMCU and NUM all sat around the same table was on Wednesday, the 15th of August, and that was as a result of a challenge being issued by a radio talk show host. That meeting was not organised by Lonmin. Did you know that?
I did not know that.
So nothing was happening as far as the wage dispute was concerned. No mechanism was being put in place. Nothing was being done. Why did you not establish that? And why did you not establish that nothing was being done?
Well, we had people, as I indicated yesterday, who were dealing with the matter at the level where everything was happening. And I think one can concede that a meeting should have happened, a negotiation should have ensued at that early stage, even before everything escalated into the violence that it did. Yes.
So steps should have been taken at a much earlier stage to deal with the wage dispute.
I would agree with that.
But, Mr. Ramaphosa, what I'm particularly interested in is why you didn't find out that nothing was being done and demand that something be done.
Well, as I indicated yesterday and even now, we had people on the executive who were dealing with these matters. And as I said yesterday, as a non-executive director, we delegate all these powers, authority, and matters to the management team who are employed on a full-time basis to deal with these matters.
But, Mr. Ramaphosa, presumably if you had known that nothing was being done in relation to the wage dispute, you would have said that this is unacceptable, steps must be taken, correct?
It is possible that any non-executive director would have said so, yes.
So you didn't even ask whether steps were being taken? Because if you had asked, you would have been told that they weren't.
Well, we got reports from where everything was happening that they had met, and Ms. Ngube, who is our representative, was dealing with the matter on an ongoing basis.
So you had no information about what was going on in relation to the wage dispute, and you made no attempt. You made no attempt to get that information personally.
I had no information on an ongoing basis about what was happening.
Mr. Ramaphosa, I see that in the email you got from Ms. Ngube, quadruple J1, page 2 of the bundle, the last sentence of that email says, "I will keep you updated should the situation get any worse."
Yes.
Did she keep you updated? Were you informed after you received the email from her that, were you informed by her that the situation had got worse?
Yes, she did inform me, and that is when the situation got really worse, when the violence then started unfolding.
Because you see, Mr. Ramaphosa, it seems to us that you expended a great deal of energy on lobbying to have the events at Marikana characterized as criminal and to increase the police presence at Marikana, but yet you did not take a single step to find out what was going on in relation to the wage dispute. Can you explain that?
Well, as I said yesterday, I was being given information of people dying and being killed. And as I indicated yesterday, that represented, in my mind, an emergency situation that needed to be stabilized. And that stabilization would, in my view, then have led to negotiations or discussions or talks beginning to happen to bring the situation to a solution. So I was confronted with information about the deaths and the injury of a number of people. So that is what I reacted to immediately.
I understand that partially, Mr. Ramaphosa, but remember we've earlier agreed that in order for the violence to end, the strike had to be resolved. So it was surely as urgent to make sure that there was at least some sort of mechanism in place in order to begin dealing with the wage dispute. Surely that was the other side of the coin and equally urgent.
I think it is the other side of the coin, but I've also been involved in situations where there have been strikes and where we have made it clear to members of the union that in any strike situation, workers should not resort to violence and attacking other workers and killing them. And during my days at the National Union of Mine Workers, we even went to an extent of writing down strike rules, that during a strike you do not attack other workers, whoever the workers might be. You do not take steps to injure them or kill them. This we did because we said, if you begin to do that, it begins to interfere with the process that you are involved in to win your demands. And the situation that was communicated to me was of an emergency nature that needed to be resolved before the discussions and negotiations could ensue. So in my view, there were then two types of situations. The emergency one, which was the violent actions that were taking place, and the normal one that would have ensued with negotiations.
But surely, Mr. Ramaphosa, there was no reason why those things could not have happened simultaneously. In fact, then you had a greater prospect of bringing the strike to an end more quickly, in which case the violence would end.
Well, I think it is easy to say that they should be dealt with simultaneously. It becomes a bit more difficult if many people are being killed on a daily basis. What you seek to do is to stabilize that so that there is peace and calm and stabilization, and thereafter you are then able to embark on proper, more fruitful discussions.
It appears to us, and we're going to argue this, Mr. Ramaphosa, that you appear to be entirely unconcerned during that week about whether there was a mechanism in place to deal with a labour dispute, even though you have said that you considered negotiation to be the only workable solution. Would you like to comment on that?
I've always been concerned about finding ways of resolving problems through negotiations. I think it is a little bit unfair on your part to say I was unconcerned. I've been more concerned than you can imagine about having people sit down and negotiate their problems and find solutions.
But, Mr. Ramaphosa, you have conceded that you did not know what was going on as far as the labour dispute was concerned, and you did not take steps to find out.
I did not know. It does not mean that one did not take steps.
Mr. Ramaphosa, you would have heard at some stage about Mr. Zukwana, the president of NUM at the time, attempting to address strikers on Wednesday, the 15th of August 2012, and the very bad reception that he received. Did you hear about that?
Yes, I got to hear about that.
Did you hear about that on the 15th of August, on the day on which it happened?
Yes. I think it could have been on the day or soon thereafter.
It could have been on the day. That must have been very, very distressing for you to hear that.
Yes. I think I would probably have seen it on television as well.
Yes, the answer, the day or soon thereafter, is a bit unclear. I'd just like to clarify one thing.
Yes.
The attempt by Mr. Zukwana to address the strikers was on the reasonably late on the Wednesday afternoon. The killing of 34 people took place on the Thursday afternoon.
That's true.
I take it your answer implies that you knew about Mr. Zukwana's unsuccessful attempt to address the strikers before the shooting on the Thursday afternoon.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, with respect. Yes, I did. And as I recall now, because most of this was being played out on television, I would have seen it on television. And similarly, I would have seen Mr. Matunjwa succeeding in going to address the workers.
Thank you, Chair. Those are our questions.
Thank you, Ms. Barnes. Mr. I understand that in terms of an arrangement between Mr. Mpofu and Mr. Bam, you're going to deal with one topic in cross-examination now, and then if matters arise during the course of his cross-examination, you may seek to cross-examine further in relation to such matters. Is it? That's the understanding.
That's correct, Mr. Chairperson. Mr. Chairperson, may I ask for a short 5-minute adjournment? I'd just like to speak to Mr. Ramaphosa's counsel, Mr. Untalt, about a document that I don't know whether they received or not. He's part of the...
We'll adjourn for 5 minutes.
Thank you.
BMW M4 Coupe. One with the machine.
A forensic audit report has found that the Independent Electoral Commission's procurement of new premises was neither fair nor transparent.
That wasn't a nice experience to see someone die like that. 18-year-old, I mean, he's still a child.
It's very pretty. Yeah, it looks very great.
Locals say they have their own big five: cattle, sheep, horses, donkeys and pigs.
That's Morning Live, daily at 6 a.m. on SABC News.
Jessica the hippo was found after she was washed down the river shortly after birth. Today, she is a large hippo and still returns for feeding and human interaction.
She also loves body exfoliating. Yes, she has a mask as well.
Jessica is the world's most famous hippo, and perhaps she's the only one who has forgotten how aggressive she's supposed to be.
That's Kaleidoscope, Sundays 5:30 p.m. on SABC News.
Dumelang, Assalamualaikum, Namaste, Goeiemorgen, Jumbo Africa, and a very warm welcome to AM News here on SABC News Channel 404. The Basic Education Minister, Angie Motshekga, has dismissed the renewed Limpopo textbook saga as a storm in a teacup.
They have to collect books the previous year. And it's actually the very principals, if that's what they told me was true, they'll be ill-disciplined because they were supposed to have collected books so that state doesn't buy books because we don't buy the same books every year. A book is supposed to last for 3 years. So they are supposed to collect them so they don't run short.
That's AM News, daily at 10 a.m. on SABC News.
Cameroon's economic capital, a unique art collection is on display. Titled Yesterday's Memory, Tomorrow's Memory.
We are trying to preserve this heritage despite many things that have changed in the designing, embroidery and the model.
If I'm telling you, you don't like it, I call it defeat.
Join Musam Khalipi on Afro Showbiz every Saturday at 19:30 CAT.
South Africans survived 2014.
Many of us actually were given bursaries by state-owned enterprises, but the state shrunk, telecom was privatized, and now you are sitting with huge unemployed people, but huge backlogs in terms of infrastructure that could develop the same young people.
It's in our hands, and our future is up to us. It's a tough year, and tough decisions will have to be made by the government. It's an election year, which makes it difficult to make tough decisions. I mean, it's tough to make tough decisions. It's especially tough in an election year.
That's Rights and Recourse, Sundays 2 p.m. on SABC News.
Zoom into Africa. This is the Kingdom of Lesotho. The leader is King Letsie III. The Kingdom of Lesotho attained full independence on 4th October in 1966. The population is more than 2 million people. One of the major languages spoken is English. Monetary unit is Maluti.
You can't have a gut feeling about other people's gut feeling.
Ngaba has continued the tradition of passing stories onto the next generation using a platform that offers stories to a far more greater audience.
Zombie no go unless you tell them to go.
This is what the audiences all over the world knew Fela Kuti for.
Join Musam Khalipi on Afro Showbiz every Saturday at 19:30 CAT.
Alleged murder mastermind Shreen Diwani briefly appeared in the Western Cape High Court on Monday morning. The 34-year-old British businessman is accused of orchestrating his wife's murder in 2010.
He has been admitted just to receive treatment.
South Africans have expressed their disappointment with a much-anticipated 20th birthday gift from Vodacom. Vodacom says more than 8 million people participated in the free data campaign. And data traffic was as much as 150% higher than normal in high-demand areas.
Make sure you don't miss Your World, weekdays between 11 and 12 midnight.
Across the globe, the continent and the entire country, every second there's always a breaking story. SABC News is your reliable eye, ear and information system in bringing you events as they happen. Our cutting-edge and hard-hitting journalism leaves no stone unturned, giving you the whole picture every time. Join us every day on SABC One and know what is happening around you. SABC News, Africa's news leader.